khona kuphi emakhaya amadolobheni asekomplasta khona lapho ubukela khona SABC 1 sesingenile ke thina emavulandlela sesifikele nihlelo lakho ilungelo lakho it's your right sinilethela ke kumahamba phambili SABC 1 Mzansi for sure mina ke bekunene ngingisimphiwe ngcongwane bekunene umthwalo ke loba madima ke kubathengela abanengi eningizimu Afrika kuphelelwa umsebenzi simo semnotho lonke kanti ngako nemanani ke lasetulo ekudla timpahla naleke natinge ngetizengo letinengi semadima lobunengi etimpelweni abantu abanengi singachizi ke isikhathi bekunene asingane endzabeni yethu namhla. It is still a steep uphill battle for many South African consumers who are running out of options to stay afloat during these tough economic times. A recent report by the organization Debt Busters paints a bleak picture of what's going on with so many households.
South African consumers are feeling really overwhelmed financially. Last year was incredibly difficult for consumers, and we've already seen a huge uptick in terms of the inquiries, in terms of people looking for financial help.
Hi Eleanor, thanks so much.
Mihlaleke zikhalazi khalili ngcingo kwi-ofisi ye-Credit Ombud. Iculo linye abantu bafuna uncedo olungabonyula kwiingxaki abajamelene nazo neziphethelene namatyala.
Chaza ukuba ityala elithile netyala elithile netyala elithile cela bawacime ku-credit bureau kuba atshitshile aprescribile ke ngelasemzini.
If you are feeling the pinch, take the necessary steps to address it and contact the credit provider. If you have a dispute, regardless of whether it's unsecured, whether it's a mortgage agreement, whether it's an installment sale agreement, whether it involves a vehicle, a house, a personal loan, it could be a short-term loan for 6 months or for 3 months. Even we know we get this payday loans, which is even for a month. If you take that loan, if you feel, for example, that you're being overcharged, if you feel that your rights have not been protected in whatever way, contact us for direction and we will advise you on what you can do. If you had laid the complaint with the credit provider and 20 days have passed and you have not been assisted, or they come back to you in the 20-day period and they tell you that they cannot assist you if you're unhappy about the outcome, approach the office of the credit ombud. We are here to assist.
Ukanti iziphumo zophando lwenziwe yinkampani iDebt Busters zibonisa ukuba abantu abaninzi bantyumpantyumpeka ematyaleni. Ngokoluphando ngabantu abathandathu eshumini abafaka izicelo zoncedo ngamatyala wabo iDebt Counselling ke ukutsho kunyaka ophelileyo. iDebt Busters kwafumanise ukuba imivuzo yabathengi ihle ngama-20 ekhulwini xa kuthelekiswa nonyaka ka-2016. Oko ke kudala ukuba kube nzima ngakumbi kubathengi ukuphuma kumgibe wokutsala nzima kwanamatyala.
What we see happening is that a lot of the payment holidays that were offered to consumers in the middle of 2020 have kind of worked their way out of the system, and now consumers are feeling the real pressure of having to pay back the debt that they had.
Enye ke yezinto ezifaka abathengi nzulu ezingxakini zemali kukuzama ukubaleka amatyala nokungaphenduli ifowuni.
Hayi unzima kule mihla yo kanti ukwazi bangaba nje ngekhulu leRand ubuye uqokelele waqokelela wafumana izinto. Ngoku kule mihla yo sesibaleka no 087 aba uqonda baba wow lelatyala lavenkile empahla mandilibaleke kunzima ngoku.
Ndinazo iilines apha eEastern Cape eAlfred zokuthatha abantu ngebhasi ukusuka ezilalini ukuza edolophini. Ndizamile ukufuna ifunding andalunga ngenxa yamatyala. Kwawesike ngexesha leCovid kwavele kwakwi-drawback sabe sikulo crisis.
Wow, isenzile icorona andinabhongo. Iweske thina bosomashishini kunzima nale yokuthi live by uziqonda isenzile zange sayazi basawuze sibe kwimeko enje. Kodwa akakusekho noko konwaba kumane kusithiwa sikabahemisa akokuhemisa nix ngoku sonke sisentyumpantyumpakekeni kwento esingayaziyo.
Please do not stop paying your account. If you can pay your account, pay it. If you can't, contact the credit provider to make some sort of arrangement. But for now, we are investigating, but that does not entitle you to stop paying the account. That's most important.
Abathengi bakhuthazwa ngaphezulu kunangaphambili ukuba bazame uncedo ngokukhawuleza kumaziko asekelwe ukuncedisa abathengi phambi kokuba isimo sibungamele. Ndinguphaphama Changana Dube kwilungelo lakho.
Asibonge umbiko ke lesondele nguphaphama Ntshangana Dube. And now, to further discuss the plight of distressed South African consumers, let's welcome via Skype Howard Gabriel, the South African Credit Ombudsman. Siphinde samukele ke namahawuta mphahlele lovela ke e-Ithuseng Credit Solutions. A very good afternoon to you too. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the show.
Good afternoon. Thank you.
All right, Howard, welcome to the show as well. I'm going to start with you. So much has been said about the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on so many households and on so many consumers and to so many South Africans in general. So in greater detail, Howard, what is the impact or the extent of the coronavirus pandemic on households and how it hit them in the pockets?
It's important to understand that last year when we experienced the first lockdown, a lot of people lost their jobs. If you look at the data produced by Stats South Africa, more than 2.2 million people lost their jobs in that quarter. What's more is that many people in that time, if they still had a job, had to reduce their salaries. So this placed the individual consumer or the individual household in a position where they're now not able to have the resources to meet all of their obligations every month. So you see what the response of the financial institutions and the credit providers was to grant that payment holidays. And many consumers benefited out of that. But it's important to understand that when you get that payment holiday for 3 months or 6 months, what it means, you still have to pay back that money at a later date. And also that the interest accrue on the money that is outstanding. The second part is that many of the people that were affected in the first lockdown, when the December period came and restaurants were closed, wine farms was closed, and all of those kinds of things happened. Many of those people who lost their income in the first phase now were put under pressure in the second phase where they weren't working, and this has been an added burden on the consumer. So we see that tremendous pressure that the second wave has now also introduced to individual households and also to individuals as consumers, and has placed a real financial strain on everyone.
Well, I would imagine your office has been overwhelmed with so many cases and conflicts and disputes between credit providers and those who took up credit, particularly during this pandemic. So I'm curious to know the role that your office plays in dealing with this kind of situation, and what are the kind of cases that you've had to experience as a result of this lockdown?
So the primary role of the credit ombud is to resolve disputes between consumers and the credit provider. And there are two types of broad disputes. The first type of dispute is to do with adverse listing on the credit bureau. So you failed to pay your account, the credit provider has listed you on the credit bureau, you then sort it out, but the listing is still, the adverse listing is still on the credit bureau. The second type of disputes we're dealing with is where you have accounts with retailers, with vehicle finance, mortgage finance, and so on. And in the credit ombud, we deal with what is called non-bank. So every credit issue, whether it's micro lenders or BMW finance or Toyota finance or SA home loans, that we're dealing with. And there, the nature of the disputes are different. So you have what appears to be simplistic matters from a legal point, like sorting out statement of accounts, but can be very tricky to resolve. So somebody would pay up their account and think they've, in this difficult time, they're trying to reduce their debt. They have an account that they've paid up, but they only receive a paid up letter and not an account closure letter. To more complicated matters such as garnishing orders, prescription and induplum, which are the more complex we are dealing with, making sure that the credit provider stay within the prescript of the National Credit Act. Just to add that the Credit Ombud is an independent body, so we're not in favor of the consumer and neither are we in favor of the credit provider. Our job, if there is a dispute between the consumer and the credit provider, is to resolve that in an impartial and in a fair way. And we primarily rely on making sure that the credit provider is adhering to the provisions of the National Credit Act.
Okay, yeah, please stay on the line. We'll certainly touch base with you and continue with this conversation. Now, Magauta, let me also bring you into this conversation. What is your perspective in terms of how adversely South Africans were affected as a result of the coronavirus pandemic?
Well, we have seen that in the sectors where, for example, the lockdown did not allow certain sectors to trade and they had to close businesses, consumers have been adversely affected. And actually, into Yogutu, only people's salaries went down. What we also saw, Uguti, even those whose salaries were not cut, they continued to earn the same salaries. They had to support abanye abantu within the family who were affected by the lockdown. So you end up having more responsibilities than you had, even if your salary was not impacted. So yes, a lot of people were negatively affected in terms of their incomes and their ability to repay their debts.
So in your opinion, Magauta, which social class is more vulnerable or susceptible to drown in debt?
Well, I think most people are in debt irrespective of the income level. But I think, you know, at professional level, I think those jobs are more resilient during this time. So the people in the lower incomes are the ones that are mostly affected by these lockdowns, because the types of jobs that they do are the ones that are easily affected during periods like this.
All right, let's leave it there for now. We'll continue our conversation after the break. Asibambe lapho ke mbukeli sijanga setolo, sitawuphinda sibuye khona nyalo. Sikwamukela futhi mbukeli ke tincingo tethu tivuliwe ukuthi ke nawe ungaba ingcenye yale nkulumo yethu. Sishayele ke licingo ku 0117146918 noma ke 0117146919 ne-email yethu ke ithi consumer@sabc.co.za. Satfolakala futhi ku Facebook na ku Twitter. Let's continue our conversation with Magauta Mphahlele. Now Magauta, let me also welcome you back to this conversation. Now kuna naku lokuthiwa ke yi unsecured loan. Ukuthi ke kahle kahle yini le unsecured loan? Is it the way to go ukuthi ema consumers ke ayithathe leyo unsecured loan as a result of the devastation caused by coronavirus?
Yeah, unfortunately, unsecured loan is the most accessible because we have different types of loan. You have a mortgage that is to ukuthenga indlu, and you can't buy a house every day. So uzothenga indlu and get your loan. And then you also get a vehicle finance, then, you know, that is for the car. And then in between, your unsecured is your credit cards, your personal loans, your payday loans. So usually siyabafundisa abantu the difference between the types of loans, especially as well as the cost of the loan, because your cheapest loan is your mortgage. So if umuntu unendlu, and then what you can do ukuthi, because the problem is that when problems happen, is that as now I'm a saving. So then you go to getting loans, but sometimes if you understand ukuthi zisebenza kanjani lezinto, you can borrow from your home loan if you have a home loan, especially during the good times. Make sure ukuthi ubhatala extra into your home loan. Then you can have an access bond. Yokuthi makune problem, you can withdraw from your home loan. And usually the interest the home loan is very low. Whereas your credit cards and my personal loans, the interest rate is very high.
So yini ke ama advantages nama disadvantages secured loan ne unsecured loan?
A secured loan in njengoba the reason why it is called secured, I gave an example ukuthi indlu, mortgage is a secured loan because what happens is that if you cannot pay, the credit provider can go and sell the house and get their money back. That is why it is called secured. Unsecured, there is nothing that is securing the loan. So what happens if you can't pay that loan? The credit provider will take legal action and get a court order. The court order can allow them to list you at the credit bureau. That means you will have a judgment against your name, which affects your credit profile. Or they can get like credit ombud said, they can get a garnishee order. That is an order that forces your employer to deduct a certain amount of money from your salary. So that is why it is called unsecured. There's nothing that they can sell to get their money back, but they can take legal action to force you to pay. But sometimes, and we've seen it, abanye abantu abana mali to pay at all. So what you will be left with is a judgment against your name, which sits for 5 years on your credit profile.
So Mahauti, should we read it in the context of a bad loan and a good loan? What is a bad loan? What is a good loan?
For us, the obvious one is that a house is a good loan because it creates wealth. You are sitting with an asset that grows. So you can buy a house for 500,000 today. 2 years later, it will have gone up to be 600,000. So that is good. But sometimes you are forced to take an unsecured loan. So lapho sibheka ama reasons sokuthi why have you taken that unsecured loan? You might want to pay for university. So it's not that bad because umuntu maka graduate, there will be something that they can show. I took out a loan, I paid for my studies. But some of us are taking loans to, we don't even know ukuthi siwasebenziselani. Omunye umuntu ushilo ukuthi sifuna ukubonisa, so you are buying things that will not benefit you at the end. Mhlambe izimpahla and things like that. But unfortunately, sometimes, and we've seen that people have to take unsecured loans because they have to buy food, they have to buy medicine and things like that because their income is not enough or the income has gone down. So akufane for different people. But generally speaking, we are saying stay away from unsecured loans unless you have a very good reason why you want to take that loan, because even if in terms of interest rate, it attracts the highest interest rate, unlike a mortgage, a car, and sometimes a credit card if you know how to use it.
But when the example you would see, unsecured loan, for instance, your personal loan. Lo munye ke utawuthi ke ufuna ukuthatha le personal loan ahambe ende tinfo tsite maybe ku-improve alikhaya lakhe noma ke ku-investor. Would that be the right cause of, would that be the right route to take?
Well, for me, the first thing, it's better to save up to improve your home. And sometimes you can borrow from your mortgage for home improvements, which means it will still attract a lower interest rate. So ama-advance, re-advance in terms of your bond. So abantu fanele educate about the different types of credit and how they can access emergency funds, for example, if you have a bond. Also with unsecured loans, unfortunately, be very careful. I think sometimes abantu, they borrow based on what they are earning now, but they don't consider things like interest rate ayakhuphuka, baba nama emergencies. So what will happen if I've borrowed 100,000 and I have an emergency? So it's very important to not take everything disposable income. Make sure that you are saving something for emergencies so that when things happen, you don't have to run away ungaphendula my phone like other people say. But during a pandemic, unfortunately, people, even those bebanama savings, apelila savings, because the lockdown will be 1 year old next month, which means that because most people say you must have savings for 6 months. 6 months in Lulila, abantu asana mali. So we can't be judging people and say you did not save. Even those who saved, the money is gone, the jobs are not there. So it's a very difficult situation for most people.
All right, Mahauta, thank you so much for your time. Please stay on the line. We'll certainly continue with this conversation in just a moment. But for now, let's take our first caller. All right, we've got Audrey from Soweto.
Yebo.
Yebo, siyaphila kunjani make? Please speak to us.
Oh, ngimake la shop kodwa ngiganeka shabalala.
Okay.
Yeah, ngine problem ngo Telecom. Ba suspenda ifone yami 2019. And then bayangiharasa ngabhadala imali na the end of 2019. And na last year ngibhadale 2,000 something. Nginama receipt. Manje bathi angathi ngibhadale 1,000 malini. Ngathi kube ngizaya lapha e-office. Yabo.
Okay. All right, mashallah siyabonga kakhulu kusishayela. We'll have your response after the break. Kwanyalo ke mbukeli asasisishelele ngasetitolo. Siyabuya khona nyalo. Leli lungelo lakho. Welcome back. Khumbula ke ukuthi tincingo tethu sesivuliwe ukuthi ke nabe ungaba ingcenye lelihlelo lethu. Sishayele ke lapha e-studio ku-0117146918 noma ke 0117146919. You can also email your thoughts to consumer@sabc.co.za or catch us on our social media platforms. Now, Mahauta, let's continue with this conversation. We've heard a caller from Soweto kumake shabalala lapha uthi ube ne dispute ke na Telkom ngoba Telkom bekaloko athi akabhadale ke imali engathi understand ukuthi qhamukapi atibhadale bo 2,000 1,000 for the past 2 years. So okay,
the contract, Anna, is a fixed term contract in terms of the Consumer Protection Act. So she must lodge a complaint with the National Consumer Commission or with the Consumer Goods and Services Ombudsman. In number, a Consumer Goods and Services Ombudsman is 011-781-2607. Bazamnceda ngokuthi alodge a complaint yakhe kanjani.
All right, now, Howard, let me also welcome you back to this conversation. Now, earlier, before we went to that ad break, Mahauta and I were just discussing the advantages and the disadvantages of secured and unsecured debt, and that can be read in the same context as good or bad debt. So, what's your perspective on good and bad debt, and what kind of debts should consumers avoid at all times?
I think the first important thing to say to consumers, if it is at all possible, you must budget properly and you must provide in your budget for savings, even if it is a small amount of money. It is a good practice to save money rather than just making credit that you cannot afford. So that's the first important point we've got to advise consumers. Now, good debt it depends on what you're going to do with the money you borrow. So if you're going to borrow money and you use it to build a house or support your car that allows you to go to work or earn a living, or you invested in a business that is going to generate an income, then that would be good debt. Bad debt is when you want to borrow money for things that are not necessary at any point in time. So, like myself, I like to keep up with my neighbors. So if they've got a fancy party, I must also have a fancy party, and so on. And that would be the wrong thing to do, is to invest money in those kinds of things. So it's really important that consumers understand that getting into debt is not necessarily bad. It depends on what you're doing with the money you've got. And can you support yourself doing this? Sometimes we have an increase in salary. Then we think, okay, now I can go buy the most expensive fridge. We go to the store, we put ourselves in debt for 15 or 20,000 rand just for the fancy fridge, when in fact maybe we should have saved.
But Howard, there is a consumer who may take a personal loan to buy food and maintain the home for sustenance as a result of loss of employment or job cuts, which so many South Africans have experienced in the past year. So would that be classified under a bad debt? Because buying food is absolutely necessary for livelihoods and sustenance.
I agree, because what we've got last year is an extraordinary situation where over a long period of time, a large number of people in our country went through very difficult times in losing their jobs or in a reducing of their incomes. So in that situation, you're finding more and more people are relying on less people that are employed, and more people are going hungry, and they have to resort to different means to support their families. So I agree that what we went through last year is an extraordinary, where people are now having to borrow money for emergencies. But emergency is different to
all right, Howard, please hold your thought for a second there, Howard. We'll certainly touch base with you in just a moment, because we have to take this caller. She's been holding on for a very long time. Poko, sakumole Clarence awubona.
Sawubona bhuti unjani?
Siyaphila kunjani baba?
Ngiphilile my
Khuluma nathi baba, what's on your mind?
On my mind, I'm not the spokesperson of the taxi people, but I just want to on this issue, because look, these are mostly black people who have contributed so much during this pandemic in terms of transporting essential workers and stuff like that, and most of them are financed by the well-known notorious SA taxi finance. But now the problem is that these fellow South Africans who are trying to make living through taxi operation, most of them, or some of them, they are unable to make the same revenue as they were making, because people now are working on rotation, on shift, and some have lost employment. So which means now, obviously, their revenue, they are being affected. Now, you've got some of them, for instance, who are paying around 12,000 or 15,000 rand for a minibus, a 15-seater. Now, this SA taxi, it gave them, yes, those 3 months payment holiday for that period. But beyond that, they have not, and they continue to repossess people's vehicles. Now, my question is to the credit ombudsman: how best can you able to assist the taxi industry on this issue?
Howard Daniels, I'm sure you've been listening. This is a very, very important question, and that needs to be tackled. But please hold your thoughts. We'll take this short break. We'll be back shortly thereafter. That was Apoko from Pretoria. Mlaleli ilungelo lakho ke bekunene sanimukela elihleli namhla ke sikhuluma ke ngetikweneti as a result of the coronavirus pandemic nekuthi ke bathengi nama consumers bangaphuma kanjani elubishini lebafake kulo ngiyo le coronavirus pandemic. Namhla ke sina Howard Daniels siphinde sebe namahawuta mphahlele from a credit, well, she's a credit expert. Now Howard, let me also bring you into this conversation. Before we enter the break, we had a caller from Poco in Pretoria who says that the taxi industry has been adversely affected because of this pandemic. And well, I'm not sure whether he is a taxi operator, but he says so many operators took up loans with the SA Taxi Council, and some of them have their taxis being repossessed because of declining incomes on their taxis. And I suppose that the lockdown has had adverse repercussions and implications on the whole taxi transportation machinery, because some consumers have lost their jobs, some consumers are now working rotational shifts, and some consumers are now working from home. And this has had a huge impact on the taxi operators, and the lenders of the loans of these taxis are now repossessing their taxis. So how can the credit ombudsman deal with this particular scenario?
Firstly, let me just say that consumers who are finding difficulty and have approached their credit providers can contact the credit ombud. You can approach us by sending us an SMS to 44786 and we'll call you back, or otherwise you can contact us through our website, or you can contact us through the telephone. But the reality is that many consumers are facing this not only in the taxi industry, where they've gone through that first payment holiday period, and then the second wave hit and they have a similar situation. And now in that second wave, we don't have the provisions of payment holidays. So the first advice I would give any consumer is speak to your credit provider when your circumstances change. I know it sounds very simple, but even my tendency when I face adverse SMSs and calls from my credit provider is to try and hide. And that is not the right thing to do. Speak to the credit provider and try and make an arrangement with the credit provider. It's important then that when you speak with a credit provider, those calls are normally recorded, that you ask the credit provider to give you a reference number so that we can go back to that call and say, but the client explained to you what the circumstances are, and you have made certain undertakings to the consumer. So that's the first thing. The second thing, which may not necessarily pertain to taxi finance, but for general in the broader credit agreements, sometimes there is a provision for credit life insurance. What that insurance means is that in the event of death or other circumstances where you don't have an income, you may be covered.
There is another major point that I'd like us to tackle a little later, Howard, but I do appreciate that the credit ombudsman has opened the door, to hear some of these complaints that have been lodged against some of the credit, the credit providers. But the big question is, shouldn't the credit ombudsman, shouldn't the issue out a warning to those credit providers not to repossess the taxis or whatever property, because the consumers have not been unable to pay their debt?
I think it's difficult for the credit ombud to say that you cannot repossess a vehicle or not. What we can make sure is that in the event the credit provider take any action against the consumer, that it does it within the law. Okay. And there are times when people complain to us about repossessions, and we find that the credit provider did not follow the law strictly. Okay. And many of our matters we have found the remedies that is beneficial for the consumer in this instance.
Thanks, Howard, for making that point. Let's take our next caller. Sinakhosi ulapha eThembisa. Sakumolweni hlelo sawubona.
Yebo Puti.
Khuluma nathi mama.
Okay, inkinga yodwa neBhuti. Ngeke ngaba ku-debt review ngabhadala zonke izinto ngathola i-clearance certificate. Kodwa ngaba nenkinga nge-shop A1 which is bekuyi-RCS. Ngayibhadala naye beyibonisa ukuthi ibhadaliwe. Azange update kuma-credit bureaus, ya only update ne-TransUnion. Experian ne-CompuScan azange ba-update. Ngithe mangizama ukuthenga indlu ngathola ukuthi i-RCS ayikaka-update. Ngafonela i-ombudsman ngabhala ama-email ngacela ukuthi ngicela usizo. Kwatholakala ukuthi bathi bafuna i-clearance certificate from kuma-credit ku-debt review le bengikuyo. But even today angakalithola usizo. So bengifuna ukwazi ukuthi ama-credit bureaus a-update kanjani.
Okay, Khosi, please stay on the line because we've got the credit ombudsman. Now, Howard, we have Khosi on the line here. She said that she went under debt review and she completed the entire process and she got a certificate of clearance. Now, the TransUnion, for instance, still hasn't updated that data. So what should happen now?
Okay. What normally happens is that when you have that certificate of clearance, we would present that certificate of clearance to the different, and there are about 5 or 6 different credit bureaus, and make sure that the adverse listing on all of the credit bureaus are removed from.
Okay, so how would you advise Khosi now? What should Khosi do now?
So the first thing is that what you do is you contact the credit bureau. If after 20 days they have not responded to your request to do this, then you approach the credit ombud and we will approach them on your behalf.
All right, Khosi, ngiyathemba ukuthi udivele ukuthi you need to approach the credit bureau, and if after 20 days kude umehluko ungashayela ke Howard the credit ombudsman office, but abeseke bayachacha kuleyo nkinga yakho. Siyabonga kakhulu ukusishayela Khosi. All right, let's take our final break. We'll be back shortly thereafter. Lilungelo Lakho. Welcome to our very last segment. And we'll try to get as much information as possible. Makhaute Mpahlele, she is the CEO of E2Seng Credit Solutions, and as well as Howard Gabriels, the credit ombudsman of South Africa. They're joining us today to tackle all things debt-ridden consumers, and as well as what to do if you're debt-ridden and what course of action you should take to get out of that particular debt. Now, Makhaute, repayment holiday that so many South Africans have enjoyed for 3 months. Now that the repayment holiday is over, what should happen to the credit that consumers have taken?
If you had a payment holiday and our financial circumstances have not improved, ungahlali uthule, go back to your credit provider, budget your salary, nokuthi spend amalini, to show them that your financial circumstances have not improved, and ask them to extend your payment holiday. Because the biggest mistake you can make is to sit and not do nothing. And that is when the credit provider will take legal action against you. So keep those communication doors open and uhlale on a record of all the conversations, so that even if it gets to court, I have been communicating, I have been advising them, Uguti, the circumstances have not changed. And most credit providers did say, Uguti, those who got payment holidays, if things have not changed, they must come back and renegotiate. So ungathuli, ungabalekela ama phone call, continue talking to them. Thank you.
Kanzi i-credit insurance bese isebenta nini yona ngoba kukhona ke nange ama-consumers lotfola ukuthi they've had job cuts, khona ke nanaba labalahlelwe umsebenzi immediately after enjoying that 3-month repayment holiday. Kutsi le credit insurance yona ibese isebenta nini nakunjani?
Remember that not everybody has a credit insurance. It's not automatic to every credit agreement. Some have it, they don't know. So do find out, because there's a few credit providers abayifakayo, but it's not compulsory. So you have to take it out. And amount nayo, it will depend on your policy for how long are they going to pay your installment. So depending, so some will pay for 3 months, some will pay for 6 months, some will pay for 12 months, some will settle. So you must understand your policy. And then if your policy it is for 6 months and then go back to your credit provider and negotiate. Because it doesn't pay forever. It depends on the policy. So it's very important to understand your policy. And then those who got payment holidays, it means that they did not have credit life insurance. Because if you had credit life insurance, you would not require a payment holiday. Your credit life insurance would pay your debts for a certain period.
Now, having worked in the credit space for quite a while now, Mahauta, do you get a sense that there is a willingness of credit providers to meet consumers halfway with their debt?
Well, I think what has happened during the pandemic, you must remember, Uguti, payment holidays, they were not forced by anybody. The Department of Trade and Industry and Competition, which is responsible for credit and the National Credit Act, did not issue any regulations in the Disaster Act to say credit providers must provide payment holiday. They voluntarily did that, and I think that was a good thing that they did for their customers. So this time I think they did try and meet their customers halfway, because they realized Guti, people were in trouble and they did not have money to pay the debts, so they came up voluntarily with the thing, Guti, we will come up with the payment holidays. So I think they did well, because there was no law forcing them to do that.
All right, Howard, we've just heard Mahauta there making a very startling revelation that not everybody has got access or is qualified for credit insurance. So what about those consumers who've been thinking that whenever they took up the loan or a credit or, whatever credit arrangement that entered into with the credit provider, only to find that they didn't have credit insurance because they don't qualify for it. Yet the thought was that, every loan has got an inbuilt credit insurance with it.
No, it's not true that every loan has an inbuilt insurance, but what we are finding is that many people get into difficulty, and when we investigate, we find that there is credit insurance on it. It's just that the consumer wasn't aware of it, and in those cases, we're able to assist consumers to secure the contribution from the insurance company in terms of the policy. Mahauta is right in saying that the policies may differ from credit provider to credit provider. Sometimes it covers you for 12 months, other times it only covers you for 3 months. So the first important thing is when you get into trouble, find out whether the credit agreement is covered by a credit life insurance. If it is, then there's a process that you've got to follow to apply for that insurance cover to assist you. So that's really important to understand. But there are times when the credit provider would ask you, do you want insurance to cover you for this? And if you say no, then you will not be covered. If you said yes, then you will see on your statement of account there's a fee that is deducted every month that you pay for that insurance cover.
Now, the unemployed with debt, how do you lessen the burden of those unemployed with so much debt and with no security whatsoever? Because at the end of the day, it's the credit providers who suffer in this. Howard, you got that?
I assume you're asking me. Let me just respond. When you're unemployed, it is a difficult situation and you're not able to meet your obligations to everybody. As said earlier by both myself and Makgauta, it's important that you go into a discussion with your credit providers. The other thing I would recommend you do is, even if you're able to pay a small amount on those accounts, that you show your willingness to be responsible for the debt you have. It's important that you demonstrate that willingness, so that when the credit provider tries to take action against you, what will happen is ultimately the credit provider can either repossess the property or go to court, get an order against you, and you have a judgment against you that is very negative on your record. But when you then come to us as the ombud for help, or if you go to seek legal assistance from somewhere else, you're able to show that you've communicated with your credit provider. You're able to show that despite being unemployed, I've put 100 Rand there or 200 Rand there to try and show I'm responsible in dealing with the debts. The worst thing you can do is to avoid your credit provider and then wait for that court order to arrive. By then, it is too late to get the help you need. So you need to proactively take steps to look after yourself.
All right, Howard Gabriels, Credit Ombudsman South Africa, and Makgauta Mpahlele, the CEO of Itusain Credit Solutions. Thanks to you two for joining us. We do appreciate your time. Let me thank our guests for taking time to be with us this afternoon. Please do join us again next week and for another consumer face discussion. Please remember that our lines will not be operational as soon as we are off air on Mondays. From me, Simpio Ngongwane, and the rest of the team, do have a great week. Cheers.
Yilungelo.